We are now into June, and we've got more exciting call-ups to pick up. We've got some injuries to discuss. We've got a whole bunch of players who could help your team, and then maybe some relievers who probably won't here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Hello and welcome, everybody, to the Saturday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Erik Halterman and Ryan Boyer back together for the first Saturday in, 4 weeks or something? Ryan, have you let all your teams fall apart the last few weeks and you'll need to pick up every single guy on today's list, or did you manage to keep up with your teams?
Managed to keep up with my teams. Yeah, apologies to everybody for my little bit of a hiatus. I had a sick 1 week and then a couple weeks much needed vacation. Went to the beach for a bit. It was very nice. But yeah, I did my best to keep up with the fantasy teams. They've kind of treaded water, I would say, over the last couple weeks, which I guess is acceptable. Not ideal, but acceptable. But yeah, ready to jump back into the podcast work with you, my friend.
Not bad. The beach of the Mississippi River there in St. Louis, or what?
Travel to Florida for a week.
Yeah. Very nice. Very nice. Well, hope you've been doing all your research while on vacation and ignoring the kids, etc., because we've got a busy one up here. As always, we're going to start with the news, which, as always, is rather injury heavy, including the confirmation that Corbin Burnes is out for the rest of this year and a good portion of next year. He will be undergoing Tommy John surgery next week, and we'll discuss his replacement, Ryne Nelson, soon. But this is just a tough one for Arizona. They're doing everything you're supposed to when you've got a young core of hitters. They've signed a whole bunch of pitchers the last couple of years. Jordan Montgomery down with TJ, Corbin Burnes down with TJ. Eduardo Rodriguez, the success story. He's given them a few innings around injuries as well. It's brutal.
Yeah, not an ideal season for the Diamondbacks for sure so far. Dating back to last year as well. But yeah, Burnes been looking shaky, I would say, for the better part of the season, especially that control, the strikeouts have been going in the wrong direction for a few years now. But obviously we didn't, he was still viewed as safe as pitchers can be. I would say he was viewed as one of the relatively safer ones, albeit with, I would say, a lower ceiling with that declining strikeout rate. But as we've grown accustomed to, no pitcher is ultimately safe and needs Tommy John surgery, as you mentioned, probably out until at least the second half of next year. I wouldn't be counting on much fantasy value from Corbin Burnes until 2027. And let's see, doing a quick check on his age. He will turn 31 in October. So, still going to be entering the mid-30s once he's hopefully fully put that TJ in the rearview mirror, but not ideal from Arizona's perspective. As you mentioned, going to talk about Ryne Nelson later among our pickups. He's going to be thrust into the Diamondbacks rotation, but for those of you who used an earlier on pick on Corbin Burnes, my apologies.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it just goes to show that durability in recent years is only durability in recent years. It doesn't necessarily mean durability this year. It also means you've put a lot of innings on your arm the last few years. Since from 2022 to 2024, Burnes was third in innings pitched. And actually, a lot of the guys in the top five here have been dealing with some injuries this year. Fourth in those 3 years was Logan Gilbert, who's got arm issues of his own. Second was Aaron Nola, who is not dealing with arm issues, but has not been himself this year. He's dealing with various minor ailments. Top in those 3 years, though, was Logan Webb, and he's totally fine. So I don't know if this gives us any pause for pitchers like him next year. I guess we could treat all these guys as individuals, but something to keep in mind. Just because somebody's managed nearly 200 innings for 3 straight seasons doesn't mean they're going to keep doing it.
Yeah, and we viewed George Kirby as one of the safer options as well, and he's just come back from the IL from a shoulder issue. Actually, got hit in the face with a comebacker his last start, but sounds like he's going to be okay to make that next start. But yeah, for those who always want, as my kids say hello in the background, for those of you who subscribe to the theory that it's never a great idea to use a early round pick on a pitcher, I think you've probably got some more ammunition this year.
Yeah, for sure. Another early round player who's recently dealt with an injury, thankfully not nearly as serious of one, is Bryce Harper. Was just placed on the IL today. Right wrist inflammation. This was just a couple days after he returned from a bruised elbow. That first one was caused by a hit by pitch, but this one perhaps a little bit more worrisome with no specific cause. I would imagine inflammation. We don't expect a particularly long absence, though, and this is just kind of what you get with Bryce Harper. The most games he's played in the last, 6 seasons now is 145. So you probably should have baked in something like this.
Yeah, and it's Rob Thompson mentioned that it's something he's been managing for a little while now. And you look at his numbers over the last, he didn't mention exactly when it started becoming an issue, but if you look at Harper's numbers over the last week or so, I think he's like 3 for 24 or something like that. And he did hit a home run his first game back from that elbow injury, but I think that's his only hit in like his last 4 or 5 games. So seems like this has been hindering him for a bit. And while it doesn't seem like a long-term issue, probably best to just let him rest it for a bit. You never, wrist issues with hitters can be tricky, definitely. You don't want those things lingering, but obviously you're going to do your best to hang on to Bryce Harper anywhere. You are going to hang on to him anywhere. We're going to talk about one potential replacement for the Phillies later in the episode, but Otto Kemp is on his way up. Guy who's done some interesting things in the minors. Alec Boehm going to shift over to first base most days. You figure, as someone who is just desperately hoping for Kyle Schwarber to pick up eligibility anywhere other than util only, he's been working out at first base pretty consistently. He's has yet to see any. I don't think he's played a single inning at first base with the Phillies. Just that little stint with the Red Sox, he played a little first base. Holding out hope maybe he can add some eligibility at first base, but I'm certainly not counting on it.
Yeah, that's a good call. Something to keep an eye on over the next couple days. We've got another fairly long-term injury. This one striking the Orioles and Ryan Mountcastle, a grade 2 right hamstring strain. Grade 2 means 8 to 12 weeks. That's 2 to 3 months. A tough one for the Orioles, even though Mountcastle only had a 628 OPS this year. Wasn't exactly doing great. How do you see the fill-ins falling for the Orioles? Is this finally Kobe Mayo's chance?
Yeah, is Kobe Mayo actually going to get some leash? He would be doing himself some favors if he would actually hit. He could earn some leash there. Just not much encouraging that we've seen so far at the big league level for Kobe Mayo. He has played regularly since being recalled this last time, and with Mountcastle out indefinitely, and you hear Ryan O'Hearn, assuming the Orioles don't climb back in with they're playing better lately, but you have to consider the playoffs an unlikely scenario at this point for them, as much as big of a hole as they dug themselves into. You hear Ryan O'Hearn potentially getting traded. He's had a really good year. That would open up another avenue of playing time for Kobe Mayo. But yeah, he's cut his strikeout rate this year, but that's all relative because he's still striking out a third of the time. Hitting the ball a little bit harder. He is hitting it in the air more, but he's pulling it a lot less so far this season. So just not a ton of optimism. He's still looking for his first extra base hit in 25 games at the major league level. Not great. There's a reason why he's been so highly thought of for so long. So I would really like to roster him and just keep him on my bench for now, if possible. maybe with a new interim manager, I don't know if Brandon Hyde was just not super high on Kobe Mayo or the front office or what, but they've been very resistant to give him regular reps. Maybe Tony Monsalino will be more in Kobe Mayo's corner here moving forward, and also the fact that Baltimore isn't playing well, maybe they just want to give their younger guys a longer leash. So fingers crossed in Kobe Mayo. Yeah, would like to roster him, but I wouldn't say I'm going out of my way to pick him up if I'm not already rostering him.
Yeah, I think that sounds fair. I was burned by Kobe Mayo a couple times already in his career. Just real quick, one correction there. He did hit his first extra base hit yesterday, a double. Okay. But what he does not have yet is a single multi-hit game as an MLB player. So he's hitting 118.
Baseball Reference yet to update their stats from last night. So
interesting.
Let's get on that, Sean Foreman.
Fangraphs gives him a double. Who knows? We'll have to go back and check the tape on that one. One more injury to discuss here. Shea Langelier. He is out with an oblique strain. That tends to be more than just a couple weeks. It doesn't look like we have a precise timetable yet, but those often can be at least a month, 6 weeks. Up next in the catcher depth chart for Oakland, Willie McIver and Johnny Parita. I don't think I've seen discussion yet that Tyler Soderstrom could move back behind the plate. I mean, that would be quite interesting if that happens. But beyond that, I don't know if I'm looking at these other two guys.
Yeah, that's the really only potentially interesting wrinkle involved in this, I think. I mean, as you mentioned, we're still waiting for the MRI results to come back, I think, to determine the severity. But several weeks, Langelier should be sidelined. He's been basically doing what we expect of him so far this year. So you want to hang on to him if you can. But the guys that are immediately going to fill in, not interested in either one of them. They probably split the duties anyway. Soderstrom, I'm not terribly optimistic they're going to put him in behind the plate. It just doesn't seem like there's been much discussion of that at all recently. And given the year he's had offensively, you can't blame him. Although they have already shifted him to left field, kind of potentially disrupting his offense. But yeah, I'm not optimistic that we're going to pick up that catcher eligibility for Tyler Soderstrom. Maybe when Nick Kurtz comes back and that closes off an additional way for Soderstrom to get playing time, maybe they'll reconsider sticking him behind the plate a little bit. But I'm not super optimistic that that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think I would bet against it as well. All right, should we move on to the main topic of our Saturday show? Our waiver wire pickups. We will start with the priority ads. These are guys who, well, it's a mix of guys who are available in at least half of Yahoo leagues, who are interesting to everybody in the shallower leagues out there, as well as some players who were just called up this week and could be interesting just about everywhere. That is certainly the case with Jac Caglianone, who has been snapped up in those daily leagues already. I believe he's only out there still in a third of Yahoo leagues, but this will be the main weekend to go add Jac Caglianone in NFBC style formats. He got the call earlier this week, has been playing right field. So even though he'll have first base eligibility now, that's his natural position, he should add a second spot soon. He hasn't really done anything yet through 4 MLB games, has 1 hit. But this is the guy who was the 6th overall pick just last year and who really tore it up in the minors before his promotion this season. In 50 games, he had 15 homers while posting a 982 OPS. Just how excited should we be for Jac Caglianone? Do you think we should look at the Nick Kurtz bids and just add 10% to that?
Yeah, that sounds pretty fair. I mean, it's all, I think, going to be about swing decisions and strikeouts with Caglianone. He has not struck out much so far, right around 25%. Chase rate is up at 36% early on. That's pretty high. Not ideal, but I mean, we're talking about a very limited sample at this point. So I don't know how much we can take away from that. hard hit rate is up near 54%. So when he's making contact, it's loud contact, which is no surprise given his reputation. But yeah, I think you're rushing out to pick up Jac Caglianone everywhere possible. Don't know if it's going to happen for him right away, but the fantasy ceiling with him is pretty immense.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. I said maybe go more than Nick Kurtz. Should add the caveat here. We're now, 6-8 weeks after the initial Nick Kurtz Fabapalooza. People have a lot less money now, so
Right.
maybe it's similar in terms of percent, but actually lower dollar values. But obviously, you know how much money's still out there in your league, so adjust accordingly. But this is going to be one of the last big Fab buys among the top prospects getting called up this year. So if you have the money and you've got a space to play Jac Caglianone, I would go throw some money at him, even if, as with any rookie, there are some downsides, certainly. You've got another rookie call-up for us. Who's that?
I do, and I wouldn't go as wild with my bidding here, but I think Kyle Teel definitely needs to be rostered, at least in your 2-catcher formats. Hit 6th in his major league debut yesterday versus the Royals, reached base 3 times. Had a great year at AAA Charlotte, 295, 394, 492, 8 home runs and 7 stolen bases in 50 games. You combine those AAA numbers from last year in 78 games, he's got an 826 OPS, 10 homers, 10 stolen bases. So good numbers from Kyle Teel. Strikes out a little bit more than you'd like. A strikeout rate at AAA is up around 25%, but not crazy high. That generally is, you expect to go up a little bit at the major league level, though. But he's also walking at like a 15% rate, which is encouraging. They did keep Edgar Quero around, so I'm not sure how the playing time is going to break down exactly. Kyle Teel was better against. He hit bats left-handed. He was actually better against lefties in the minors this year, but I mean, it makes sense for him to see most of his reps against righties, and Caro, who's a switch hitter, can start against all the lefties. Good athlete for a catcher. I don't know if he's going to be like a JT Real Muto type stolen base contributor, but he could chip in a little more in that regard than you're used to from your normal catcher. Perfect Shea Langelier's replacement, I think. Don't know that Teel doesn't necessarily needs to be rostered in 1-catcher leagues. The offensive ceiling, I don't know, is super high. He looks like more of a floor play to me, but a little bit of power and some unusual speed at the catcher position. So I think that if you are in need of a catcher, on June 7th, it probably needs to be at least a 6 or 7% bid, maybe even a little bit more than that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense for those 2-catcher leagues. Real quick, while we're on the topic of catchers, there was a question earlier about Drake Baldwin or Agustin Ramirez. I think these are guys who would maybe still be out there in 1-catcher leagues. If you've just lost Langelier, which of those would be your preferred pivot?
I would lean Baldwin since he's getting those regular reps now and batting higher in the lineup. I also think he's probably going to have fewer peaks and valleys. I suspect Ramirez will have some areas where he's going to slump, less so with Baldwin.
Yeah, it seems fair enough. I think if Ramirez had kept running, which was one of the things that was part of his appeal, maybe that would tip the scales towards him, but he only has 1 steal, which I think was in one of his first couple games. Yep. He's not actually that fast. He just stole a bunch of bases in the minors, and maybe we're seeing he's not going to get the green light, and that would change who he is as a player. I've got a third call-up for you this week. Ronny Mauricio, an infielder for the Mets, who actually debuted back in 2023, and then tore his ACL in winter ball that year, missed all of the 2024 season and the start of this year as well. But after struggling a little bit in the low minors in his first few games back, he then went on to hit .515 with 3 homers and 4 steals in just 9 AAA games. Got the call earlier this week when Mark Vientos hit the IL with a hamstring injury. And so there's a lot to discuss with Mauricio. There's what's the playing time outlook? And, well, right now he's got the opportunity to play third in place of Vientos, or if they needed to have him play shortstop in place of Francisco Lindor, who's dealing with a broken toe and still having pinch hit game-winning hits, apparently. So there's some short-term playing time here. Mauricio basically needs to prove himself, I think, over this stretch and show that the Mets can't send him back down. I think there's definitely a floor here that by the end of June, Mauricio's back in the minors because Vientos, Beatty, Luis Angel Acuna, there's a bunch of other young hitters who are a little bit ahead of him who deserve some playing time. But what could Mauricio be if everything goes well? Let's look back at his 2023 at AAA. Right before his debut. In 3/4 of a season, he had 23 homers and 24 steals while hitting .292. That's a very promising all-around talent. He's occasionally ran some higher strikeout rates in the minors, so I wonder if he's maybe more of a 4-category guy who, hits .240, but is a 2020 threat over the course of a full season. Pretty promising player. He was not an elite prospect, but a top 50 sort of fantasy prospect, certainly before his injuries. And if he gets the chance to carve out a regular lineup spot in a very good team, basically if he hits well enough these next 2 weeks or so while Vientos is out, there's a chance Ronny Mauricio is just a starter for the Mets the rest of the year and is back on the track that it looked like he was a couple of seasons ago. So I wouldn't go too crazy with the bid because of that downside, but I definitely want to be the one with him on my team just in case the upside's there. So at least, a 4 or 5% bid, I would think.
Yep, I think that's fair. They've been really careful with his workload at AAA. I don't think he has started more than 2 days in a row all season yet. From that long layoff, a couple different knee surgeries. So in a way, it's not great timing because this is his chance, as you mentioned, to show in these next couple of weeks that he's deserving of a regular spot in the Mets lineup. And he might not be built up right now for that, although he was hitting really well in the minors. So he'll get that chance. He's not off to a great start in this super small sample this week, but the upside with Mauricio definitely warrants at least a modest bid. This guy is my next guy. Actually crossed over our 50% Yahoo threshold since I put his name on the list. He's now at 53%. And that's Ceddanne Rafaela of the Boston Red Sox. I mean, people have been trying to bench him to make room for Roman Anthony basically all season. I include myself in that group. But Ceddanne Rafaela not going quietly, had a home run in 3 straight games prior to Friday, 4 home runs over his last 8 games. And he's made some legitimate improvements at the plate. He's got his strikeout rate under 20% this season, also hitting the ball harder. Hard hit rate's almost up at 45%. Barrel rate is almost at 13%. He's 7 for 7 in stolen bases, but he hasn't attempted a stolen base since April, which is kind of odd. I'm not really sure why that's the case, considering that he's getting on base at a better clip. And during that latter stretch, I suspect it's just kind of fluky, and he'll start running some more and be useful in that area. He's going to be a streaky hitter. I don't know if that's ever going to change. Maybe he can make those streaks shorter if he can sustain these improvements with the strikeout rate. But at the very least, I think we can, given his elite defense and the legitimate improvements he's made so far offensively, I think we can put to bed any rest of him being benched or turned into a super utility player. I think he's going to stick in center field. So the playing time should definitely be there. As I said, they're going to be ups and downs. Probably not a great bet for average, but he showed recently he can provide some power and some speed. So, and triple eligible he is in Yahoo leagues, which always comes in handy as well. He's going to be rostered in a lot of leagues already, as I mentioned, but if he is still out there, I think he's worth at least a 6 or 7% bid.
Yeah, I saw an interesting discussion about Rafaela going around Twitter earlier this week. I forget exactly who was having it, but they were comparing his StatCast page to Pete Crow Armstrong's, and most of the sliders looked incredibly similar.
Wow.
It's just PCA has been elite at pulled fly balls. Rafaela is not at all this year, but a lot of the underlying skills are excellent with Rafaela, with that glove as well.
308-foot home run was definitely not
yeah, that'll
cooled.
help. Yeah. Well, yeah, so that also says something about PCA's ridiculous season. If you max out on pulled fly balls, you're going to get the most out of your skill set, it seems. But excited to see what Rafaela is doing. And hey, maybe he'll go full PCA on us at some point. My next guy on the list is not going to be one of the best players in the league at any point in his career, but Thairo Estrada is now back as a regular in Coors Field, and that is basically all it takes to be interesting in most formats to me. Estrada was somebody who established himself as a respectable player for a couple of years with the Giants. If you look at his average numbers from 22 and 23, 14 homers, 22 steals while hitting about 266. That's a solid all-arounder. And then you put that guy in Coors Field, that's a pretty good player, even if he doesn't stand out in any one area. Now, he does have to get back to being that guy. He really had a disaster of a year last year and was let go by the Giants. But the Rockies gave him more than $3 million in a major league deal, so they think he's still at least a solid regular. They didn't get the chance to find out early in the season. He broke his wrist, but he made it back last Friday, I believe it was. He's been playing nearly every day since then, and I don't know if there's too much to say about his numbers so far. He's hitting 273, 0 homers, 0 steals. Nothing special, but somebody who should give you a lot of playing time and a pretty good boost to your batting average while not being a 0 in homers and steals. I think that plays in most formats, although I don't think you need to bid very much, just 2-3% most likely.
Yeah, and maybe most notably, since he's returned, he's batted second and anywhere from second to fifth. Hasn't batted any lower than that. So, I mean, it's not the ideal lineup to be in the middle of, certainly, but he does play at Coors Field. Thairo Estrada was a guy that I actually rostered a lot in spring before he got hurt as my middle infield option. Thought he was a good bounce back candidate in that regard, and was mostly forgotten, I think, in a lot of leagues because of that injury, but now's the time to pick him back up and at the very least start him in Coors heavy weeks. My next guy is going to be kind of similar to my last guy, multi-position eligible player, and that's Willi Castro, who's been heating up at the plate. He's got a pair of 2-homer games over his last 8 contests since coming back from the IL back in early May, sporting an 887 OPS, 5 home runs, and a couple stolen bases. And mostly this is the fact that he's, as I mentioned, quadruple eligible, and he's just incredibly handy to have, especially in your NFBC leagues where you do not have your IL spots. There's not much upside here. How many stolen bases did he have a couple years ago? He trailed off pretty notably in that regard last year, but even though he's not running as much, still useful from the stolen base perspective, has some power, and has a ton of positional eligibility. So if you're in need of an injury fill-in, Willi Castro looks like a very solid option, and I don't think you're going to have to go crazy bidding on him. Maybe 3% probably gets it done.
Yeah, that seems fair to me. Before we move on to the priority hitters here, there was a question about a couple more young Red Sox, Christian Campbell and Marcelo Meyer. Neither of them really performing right now. Campbell was one of the big stories of spring training when he won the job, but he's fallen off to 220 average, 5 homers, 2 steals, just a 651 OPS. Meanwhile, Marcelo Meyer, 10 games, has a homer, but is hitting just 206, no steals. Would you rather take some of these guys we just talked about, your Thairo Estradas and your Willi Castros, who are solid but boring veterans? Would you prefer them in a 12-teamer to guys like Campbell or Meyer?
I would still take Campbell over all those guys. I just think that the ceiling is still so much higher even though he's, outside of he was really good in April and has been really, really bad since then. But still holding out hope that he can produce value in a 12-teamer. Meyer seems more like a floor play to me, and he's still incredibly young. So a 12-teamer, I don't think you need to rush to add him. I would rather, in a redraft, I would rather have those other two guys.
All right, makes sense to me. Let's move on to some priority pitchers where we've got a handful of guys benefiting from injuries to their teammates to lead these things off. Ryne Nelson, who we discussed earlier, is my top guy here. He will be in the Diamondbacks rotation for the rest of this year, presumably, with Corbin Burnes out for Tommy John surgery. And Nelson, I think, is just a completely solid pitcher who would already be a number 4 or 5 starter for most teams, and he'd already be on someone's roster, and they wouldn't start him against every opponent, but he'd be perfectly fine. If you look at his numbers over the last 2 seasons, it's a 4.06 ERA, 120 WHIP, nothing too special. 20% strikeout rate is a hair below average, but combined with a 5.5% walk rate, that's pretty good. League average ground balls as well. A guy whose primary skill is avoiding walks is never going to be that exciting, especially for fantasy purposes. We really would prefer more strikeouts. But the Diamondbacks are a decent team, and Ryne Nelson is completely fine. Again, most of the ERA estimators are even a little bit better than that 4.06, 389 xFIP, 398 SIERA, a hair better there. You get a guy who's capable of a high 3s, maybe very low 4s ERA, I think you're going to use that guy against most opponents in most formats. So nothing special, wouldn't blow the bank on him, but I think he's a pretty solid, reliable arm. You buy that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you mentioned, it's more of a floor play. He's limiting the walks and not a great source of strikeouts, but he did show a little bit more in flashes in that regard last season. So I think, and the Diamondbacks have to be playing a little better moving forward, I would think. So hopefully a good source of wins moving forward for Ryne Nelson. Another guy getting a shot, as you mentioned, because of injury is David Festa, and his first start back in the majors did not go well. 8 runs over 3 2/3 innings versus the Athletics on Thursday, but did have 6 strikeouts in those 3 2/3. Might have been rushed back to the rotation because of that injury to Pablo Lopez. Festa missed a few weeks in May at AAA with arm fatigue. He only made a couple starts there since then, so maybe he wasn't quite ready to come back, and they just felt like they had to because of the Lopez injury. Prior to that Thursday start, he'd been great with the Twins, 1.38 ERA, 15-5 strikeout to walk rate in 13 innings. Last season with the Twins, not a great ERA, but 77-23 strikeout to walk rate over 64 1/3 innings. This is a guy with a 33% strikeout rate during his time at AAA. So he's a proven bat misser. He's already proven he can miss bats at the major league level as well. They've been very careful with his workload. I don't know if he's gone by more than like 5 innings in any start at any level this season, or got his pitch count past more than like 90. So Rocco doesn't like to let his pitchers face the lineup a third time through often, especially his younger guys. So maybe Festa has a hard time picking up wins, but I really like the strikeout upside, and it's a significant injury for Pablo Lopez, a teres major strain. Looking at an 8 to 12 week absence, so David Festa should get some leash here to figure out what he can do, and I like the strikeout upside. Because he's coming off such a clunker, maybe you can sneak a 3% bid at him and pick him up, and I think that could pay off.
Yeah, and I would be looking to do so. Both last year and this year, Festa had promising ERA estimators and underlying numbers with a bad ERA, and eventually I would start to worry about that, but he's only 81 innings into his career. I don't think we're at that point yet. I think I would look at the ERA estimators and say, this is a guy who gets a lot of strikeouts and has about a league average walk rate. That's going to work. I think for both him and Zebby Matthews, who we have predicted to be a future Cy Young winner in the chat here. Maybe. We'll see about that. Both of them with Pablo Lopez out multiple months. are going to be treated, I think, as regular rotation members. I was just looking at Matthews's innings in each of his starts. They went 3 and 4 in his first two, but then 7 and 5 in his last two. I bet we see a similar pattern with Festa. If the Twins are relying on these guys to start every 5 games, you kind of do need a little bit more length than if they're just temporary fill-ins. So I would expect both of those guys to lock down more permanent, more typical starting roles going forward. And I'm interested in both of them, even though neither of them has actually provided a good ERA yet. Let's round out a trio of pitchers who are benefiting from teammate injuries. Actually, maybe your fourth guy might even somewhat have an injury teammate factor as well. But Mick Abel is my guy here. We thought Mick Abel was only up for a spot start or two in place of Aaron Nola, who's dealing with an ankle issue. But then Nola suffered a setback side stiffness. So it's 2 injuries, which are pretty minor. But it was enough to shut down Nola for a few days, which means they're going to need to ramp him back up. It's going to take some time until Aaron Nola can return to the rotation. And so that gives Mick Abel some runway, and that might be all he needs, because what happened earlier this year is Mick Abel came up for 1 spot start, was excellent, didn't walk anybody, didn't give up any runs, outpitched Paul Skeens, but he was headed right back down all along. And that could happen. If the plan all along is you come up for a spot start, it doesn't really matter how well you pitch. But if you get the opportunity to make 3-4 starts in a row and you pitch well in those 4, then the team has to do something. Maybe a temporary 6-man rotation, maybe a Phantom IL stint for Jesus Luzardo if he has another couple struggles. Basically, there's now a real chance that Abel could spend the rest of the year in the Phillies rotation. I still think it's more likely than not he goes back down in 4 or 5 starts, but it's a legitimate opening. Or maybe he, gives a 4-start audition here and then gets traded for an outfielder at the deadline. The Phillies could definitely use more help there. I still don't know how much faith we should have in Abel. He's somebody who was quite a big prospect when he was drafted 15th overall back in 2020, but then had massive control problems for most of his time in the minors. He's taken steps forward, although it's still actually an 11% walk rate at AAA this year, better than it used to be, but not good. But he's yet to walk a batter through 2 MLB starts. He's always had good strikeout stuff. If he really is going to show this improved control, he might not just be, a decent back-end starter. He could still be really something. And so the upside here, the potential that he actually establishes himself as a rotation member for a good Phillies team, that's enough that in leagues where he's still out there, that's still more than half of Yahoo leagues, also about a quarter of TGFBI leagues. There's going to be some deeper leagues where just nobody thought to take a chance on what looked like just a spot start. I would place some real bids on Mick Abel, even though, again, there is still the downside that it's only 2-3 more starts. The upside now looks to actually be there for him. So are you buying in?
Yeah, I think it just all depends on that, on the improved control. I mean, the control was so bad at some points in the minors where a lot of people assumed he was going to eventually wind up in the bullpen. But, as you mentioned, 11%, still high this year, but that's a notable improvement for him. And he's kept the walks completely off the board at the major league level. How much should we buy into that? I mean, his next start could easily be a 5-walk outing. No one would be surprised by that. So, but as you mentioned, the strikeout stuff has always been there. So sometimes they just need a while to these younger pitchers to find the zone with consistency. Maybe he's just now beginning to do that. One guy I would like to see find the zone consistently more is Luis L. Ortiz, but in Cleveland, I trust at least the pitching development. And Luis L. Ortiz's last 7 starts, 2.75 ERA. He has more than a strikeout per inning over that stretch. Last time out this week at Yankee Stadium, went 5 2/3 shutout innings, struck out 7 batters. The walks that I mentioned, still been an issue with the Guardians, but he had a 7.6% walk rate in 2024 with the Pirates. So it's the good controls in there somewhere. And Cleveland is generally a spot where a pitching development where they are good about getting their guys just to pound the strike zone. So I'm holding out hope that Ortiz can do that more consistently. And if he can, I think he's a potential to be a true breakout performer. I don't know that I don't have much faith about the consistency right now until he shows that sustained improved control, but I like rostering him in your deeper formats. And I think he's worth at least a 5% bid if he's still hanging out there in your waiver wire.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I mentioned there might be an injury angle here as well. His teammate Shane Bieber was working his way back from Tommy John surgery, was going to take someone's spot before too long. No guarantee it was going to be Ortiz. In fact, I probably would say it probably wasn't going to be Ortiz, but his spot is a little bit safer for a little bit longer now that Shane Bieber has unfortunately been shut down from throwing with what seems to be some sort of setback. I don't know exactly how bad or how long that will be, but Ortiz's spot looks a little bit safer. Should we move on now to the deep league pitcher ads? And let's go back to you, Ryan, for a St. Louis Cardinal.
Yeah, Michael McGreevy is going to come up and get a start Sunday. Not a great matchup. Going to be facing the Dodgers in that start, but Oliver Marmol has mentioned that he is expected to give McGreevy a little bit of a runway here in June. They're going to run with a 6-man rotation while they have lots of games without off days. So assuming that does happen, his next couple starts tentatively line up at Milwaukee and at home against the Reds. That's a much more appetizing duo of starts there. And McGreevy's been really good when given a chance at the major league level. 1.57 ERA, 0.7 WHIP, 23-3 strikeout to walk rate over 28 2/3 innings. Also been great this year at AAA Memphis with a 2.78 ERA, more than a strikeout per inning. He's kept the walks down there. He's also been red hot lately. If you combine his last 6 appearances at the major league level and minor league level, ERA just barely over 1, 38-6 strikeout to walk rate over 32 innings. So at the very least, it sounds like he's going to be getting at least 2 or 3 starts at the major league level and potentially could get more than that. Andre Palante has been struggling lately. Matthew Lobator left his last outing with fatigue issues. Doesn't seem there's really any concern there that there's an actual injury. They expect him to make his next start, but something to monitor and potentially could give McGreevy another path to starts. And I don't think the ceiling here is super high, but I do think McGreevy could be useful in pretty much any sort of fantasy format as a back end starter type.
Yeah, McGreevy is somebody I was targeting as, a last round pick sort back in draft season, the kind of guy where if he wins a rotation spot, cool. And if he doesn't, then I know who my first drop is. And unfortunately, he was my first drop a lot of places, but I've been keeping an eye, hoping he gets the chance to return. Hopefully this turns into a permanent opportunity. He's pretty interesting pitcher without elite strikeout stuff, but very good walk rates and ground ball rates. I think that's something that could work at the highest level. So I'm hoping that this is finally the opportunity for him. My pitcher up next here is Sawyer Gipson-Long, who recently returned from Tommy John surgery for the Tigers, was not very good in his first start back. And the fact that it came against the White Sox, maybe we should scale that down and say he was awful. Allowed 3 runs on 5 hits and a walk in 3 2/3 innings on Wednesday, struck out just 3. But Sawyer Gipson-Long is a pretty interesting prospect. I say prospect, he's 27. He was a late bloomer who showed something in 4 starts in 2023, a 2.70 ERA, a 32% strikeout rate. But then he needed Tommy John surgery, missed all of last year. Also needed, I believe it was hip surgery too. It was a difficult season for him last year. But has the opportunity to perhaps establish himself as a member of the Tigers rotation if he lives up to that potential. Maybe not, though it could just be a very temporary thing until the team gets healthy again. But somebody who has his potential strikeout stuff and is getting an opportunity now, It's one of those guys where I just want to see where it goes. I don't want to throw much money at him because, again, might only make 1 or 2 more starts, if that. But he did look good in his rehab starts in 5 outings, 2.20 ERA, 0.98 WHIP, a 25% strikeout rate to go the 3% walk rate, also a 59% ground ball rate. So pretty much everything looked good in rehab. I'm willing to give him a pass for 1 bad major league start and just see if the Tigers can find a role for him going forward. You buy in?
Yeah. In your deeper leagues.
Yeah.
Yeah, in your deeper leagues. You always worry about that long of a layoff, and especially with good but not a great pitching prospect, you might need to knock some rust off, and they're going to be super careful with his workload, I would imagine. So I do like the arm, though, and certainly on a team that where there's potential to pick up some wins. I'm going to move to the relief ranks with my next recommendation. Ronny Henriquez of the Marlins. Looks like he might be kind of closer 1A and 1B with Calvin Fauché right now. Jesus Tinoco out with a forearm injury. He had been pitching more in low leverage lately anyway, even before getting hurt. And Henriquez has been good. 2.20 ERA, 40 strikeouts over 28 and 2/3 innings. He's added a new sweeper this year that's produced a 50% whiff rate. Also has above average velo and elite spin on that 4-seamer. Does not have great control. He's kind of a former failed starter turned reliever. Still doesn't throw strikes on a consistent basis, but plenty of those kinds of guys have turned into really good relievers. I'm not positive that Henriquez is going to fall into that bucket, but there's not a lot of competition in that Marlins bullpen. I think he could potentially emerge, and he's shown to have plenty of bat missing ability. So a modest bid, if you're digging deep for saves, I think is a viable option for Henriquez.
All right. If you're digging deep for saves, I'm going to just throw a grab bag of next man up relievers on good teams at you. And I'm curious if any of them stand out in any way. First up, Pierce Johnson looks like maybe the next man up if Atlanta decides to move on from Raisel Iglesias, who's really been struggling lately. Johnson has been, I believe, the second highest leverage righty. There's some, I guess, Daysbel Hernandez was maybe slightly ahead of him, but he's currently out with a forearm injury. Dylan Lee or Aaron Bummer are lefties. And also Craig Kimbrell was called up for just 1 day. I thought maybe he was going to be the next man up, but he's since been DFA'd. So I guess that leaves Pierce Johnson. Then in the Phillies, we've got Orion Kerkering. Actually hasn't given up a run in a month, although his strikeout and walk numbers aren't great. I mentioned him only because Jordan Romano has given up runs, and I believe it's 3 straight. Basically, as soon as we all started getting behind Jordan Romano, he seemed to fall back into his old ways and has been struggling. And then I'll give you 2 Dodgers as well, because the team has said Tanner Scott, not actually a closer right now. He hasn't totally pitched like one. Michael Kopech and Kirby Yates, both back from injury today. So would you throw a dart in a deep league at any of those 4, Pierce Johnson, Orion Kerkering, Michael Kopech, or Kirby Yates?
Deep leagues, sure. I mean, especially if you're desperate for saves. I kind of like Pierce Johnson. He's always had strikeout stuff. Often not great control, but his control has been fine this year, and seems like he pretty clearly is next in line, as you mentioned, in that Braves bullpen. So I like him the most out of that group. Kopech really didn't pitch well in his rehab assignment. Not convinced he's completely feeling 100% yet, but obviously he showed the ability down the stretch last year to be a dominant arm, and he's on a fantastic team. And Kirby Yates has found that fountain of youth and still looks really good. I think they're both worth modest bids as well. But if you're just looking mostly for saves, I think Pierce Johnson is probably the best option there.
Right, fair enough. You got another starter?
Go back to a starter for my last recommendation. Erik, do you prescribe to the theory that you cannot trust guys with 2 first names? Is that something you agree to?
It feels vaguely bigoted, but for our purposes, yes.
Okay, Davis Martin of your Chicago White Sox, not your Chicago White Sox, but the
Somebody's
Chicago
Chicago White Sox,
Sox. You know,
presumably.
not Jerry Reinsdorf's Chicago White Sox anymore, apparently, which is good news for everybody, frankly.
Eventually, yeah, they're selling in like 5 years? It was a very weird story,
Yeah,
but
got to wait out a little bit.
eventually
But
you'll get out from under the Reinsdorf's White Sox
yeah,
fans.
there's light at the end of the tunnel, White Sox fans. Yeah, Davis Martin's been good lately. 3.09 ERA, got a whip under 1, 20-5 strikeout to walk rate, over 32 innings, over covering his last 5 starts. Had 7 strikeouts over 6 innings against the Royals on Friday. Went 6+ innings in all 5 of those outings, so he's going deep into games. Got a really good kick change, kind of the in vogue pitch this year, and that pairs well with a high spin fastball. Davis Martin has obvious disadvantages beyond those 2 first names. Plays for the White Sox. He's not in a great park. Also not a great strikeout guy, but as I mentioned, did strike out 7 his last time out, so it's potentially in there a little bit and showing better control this year. And I like that pitching development with the White Sox. I think they could get the most out of Davis Martin, even though the talent is fairly modest. But there are obvious disadvantages. He does have a matchup at Houston his next time out, which ordinarily you would think that isn't great, but the Astros are not a great offense this year. So perhaps if you're digging deep, you can stream him there. He's not a guy that you need to go out of your way to add, but I'm okay with streaming Davis Martin in weeks where he does have good matchups.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. If you're going to not strike out nearly enough batters, at least have good control and an above average ground ball rate. And Martin does have those things. So I think that keeps him as a viable option. Let's move to our deep league hitters, but stick with the White Sox. It's just that kind of day. Mike Tauchman is now settling in as an everyday leadoff man, it looks like, for the team, at least against righties. Could be even playing more than that. Mike Tauchman, useful player when he's playing. He has never been all that special of a player, but he actually was an above average hitter each of the last 2 seasons, a 110 WRC plus over those 2 years with the Cubs. Not going to give you as much power or speed as you want. Over those 2 seasons, it was a combined 15 homers and 13 steals in 751 plate appearances, so over a full season. It's more like 12-10 pace or something over the course of a full year, but he has been on fire in 17 games this year, got an OPS north of 1,000. Really, it's just the playing time and the role. I don't trust that this kind of run is going to continue. And again, I'm not sure just how many lefties he's going to start against, but I believe he hasn't sat against one in a while, and he's been excellent since returning from a hamstring strain. So I'll take an everyday leadoff man who's playing well, regardless of his history and his current team, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you laid it out perfectly there. He's a guy who's you feel like he's had to wait until like well into spring training or late in the offseason to find a job, and then he winds up playing more than you always anticipate. But a useful player, Mike Tauchman, and why he's getting tons of at-bats for, albeit a bad team, it's still a viable route to usefulness in your deeper formats.
A quick correction to myself here. Well, not necessarily a correction. He hasn't sat against a lefty since late May because it looks like the White Sox haven't played a lefty since late May. So we don't actually know what he's going to do against left-handers. But the way he's been hitting, I would imagine he's going to get his chances.
Yeah, that's a difficult depth chart to figure out. I wouldn't be able to say with confidence one way or the other whether Tauchman's going to play much against lefties or not. We just don't know how that's going to shake out. F in our chat mentioned Wenceel Perez earlier, and I'm going to make them happy, and he's going to be my next recommendation. 8 starts in the last 10 games since coming back from the IL, Wenceel Perez, and he's got 3 home runs in those games. He's batted 5th in his last 2 starts. you go back between AAA and the majors from last season, combine those two levels, he hit 11 home runs and stole 13 bases in 127 games. Not an elite pace by any means, but shows you can be useful in both of those categories if given regular playing time. And I think he's probably going to get it with the Tigers. Matt Vierling had a setback with his shoulder, and I just don't know when we're going to see him again. That should give Wenceel Perez some leash, I would think, and not a super high ceiling, but switch hitter, path to regular playing time, has a little bit of power, has a little bit of speed on a good team. So that's enough in a deeper league to make him interesting, I think.
Yeah, I think that seems fair. I'll get to my next guy in a minute, but I wanted to ask you about Abraham Toro. There's been a question about him in the chat. I have not put him on the list, despite thinking about him perhaps for the last couple weeks, but we've just had a pretty long career of Abraham Toro being a below average hitter, which is just not good enough for a corner bat. The fact that he's on a tear right now in 22 games, got an 847 OPS. I mean, he does have just a 15% strikeout rate, so maybe you could buy him giving you a good batting average, and Fenway Park's a great place to hit. I've just viewed Toro as somebody who's going to lose his job in 3 days the whole time that he's had the job, but should I start rethinking that?
It feels like Abraham Toro does this like every year at some point. Like he gets a regular run of playing time and looks like the guy that was interesting because he put up big numbers in the minors at times. And then he eventually just falls back to what he usually is. And I have no reason to believe that's not going to happen now. I mean, it's not exciting fantasy analysis to just say, yeah, go ahead and write it out while he's hot and cut him quick once he cools off. But I just think that's probably the best path. And in addition to him cooling off, I just think the Red Sox are probably going to find another solution at first base, and his playing time is going to dry up sooner rather than later. So yeah, not super interested in Abraham Toro, but your deeper leagues, sure, he's worth a shot in there.
So a lack of an endorsement, go pick him up anyway. I think that sounds fair for Abraham Toro. My next guy on the list here is Jacob Melton, who was just called up for his MLB debut by the Astros. He is a prospect, not an elite one at all, but a real one, 166 on James Anderson's top 400. Somebody who is probably, his glove is stronger than his bat. He can run. He's had some decent stolen base totals in a couple of his seasons in the minors, 30 last year, 46 the year before that. But the bat has been just barely above average, okay power and about league average strikeout rates. But if the playing time is going to be there, and he was playing every day since his call up, of course, right after I put him on the list here, he is sitting today. So maybe a little bit less exciting there. Melton hasn't done much, 3 hits in his first 5 games, but somebody with a good outfield glove who's going to play pretty regularly, it seems, at least temporarily. Is there much here with Jacob Melton, or should I have thrown somebody else on there?
Yeah, Melton's actually a guy targeted late in draft champions leagues. That was back when everyone was looking at the Houston outfield depth chart and was thinking, where in the world are they going to find guys to fill these plate appearances? That was back before they converted their 35-year-old second baseman to the outfield and their top third base prospect into an outfielder. So, and that immediately made Jacob Melton less interesting as far as, ascending the Houston depth chart, but he does have some interesting tools. So I think in your deeper formats, yeah, I think he's a viable option, as is Nick Gonzalez, who is definitely more of a floor play than a ceiling play, certainly. But he started 3 of 4 since coming back from the injured list, batted cleanup against a lefty on Thursday before batting second against a righty on Friday. I think he's a pretty good bet for average. I don't know that it's going to be much beyond that, but has the potential to be an accumulator if he continues to get regular playing time, which I think he probably will. a little bit of power, not really much speed, but a batting average is not going to kill you with a little bit of pop, and he could score some runs if he continues to hit higher in the order as he has been lately for the Pirates. We're long gone from the days of him being exciting as a former top 5 overall pick when he looked like he could be a potential batting champion, or at least that was the dream, and hasn't worked out in that regard. But Nick Gonzalez, I think in your deeper formats could be a decent accumulator.
Yeah, Gonzalez's numbers last year were nothing special, but a 19% strikeout rate with an 8% barrel rate. There's a lot of guys who have pretty much success if they can keep up those numbers. So I wouldn't mind Nick Gonzalez in a lot of formats. Let's wrap things up with, I'll give you the choice of one of 2 players who are filling in for Bryce Harper. Well, I don't know if I'll give you the choice. I'll give the Phillies the choice. Both Edmundo Sosa and Otto Kemp are in the lineup today against the lefty, but whichever of them is starting tomorrow against Paul Skeens, I think I would pick up to use for a couple weeks in deeper formats. If it's Edmundo Sosa, who I think it will be, he's just a utility man, but a perfectly fine one. He's hitting 281 this season, actually with an expected batting average of 294. He'll give you a respectable batting average without nearly enough power or speed, but if he's in a temporary everyday role while Bryce Harper is on the IL, guy playing every day in a good park for a good lineup, Edmundo Sosa should give you a couple weeks worth of usable numbers, and he's eligible at second, third, or shortstop. I do think, as F says in the chat, he's slept on. I think if Edmundo Sosa was a regular somewhere, he'd be on a lot of fantasy teams, just not doing a lot, but doing enough. But then we also have Otto Kemp, who was the man called up to take Bryce Harper's spot, a fellow right-handed bat. And I really don't know what to do with Otto Kemp. I know a lot of Phillies fans are getting quite excited about him. He is quite a fun story. He was an undrafted free agent who the Phillies signed back in 2022. He wasn't particularly good in the minors that year or in 2023. But in 2024, last year, had an 881 OPS, 16 homers, 20 steals. This year, in 58 games at the AAA level, he's got his OPS up to 1010, already has 14 homers and 11 steals. I don't think I trust somebody who's 25 at AAA and is having those good numbers while striking out 25% of the time, which in and of itself, not a problem. You can succeed with a 25% strikeout rate, but a number like that at AAA often jumps to 28, 29, 30 at the big league level. I would bet against players with Otto Kemp's track record turning into legitimate major leaguers, but it's hard to ignore a 10-10 OPS in a couple months in the minors. If he's the one starting ahead of Edmundo Sosa tomorrow against a righty, probably him at third with Alec Bohm taking Harper's spot at first base, I do think you got to take a look and see if there's anything there for at least the next couple weeks. Would you buy in at all on Otto Kemp, or would you go for Edmundo Sosa?
Well, Eric, as someone who has followed Otto Kemp's career since he was at Point Loma Nazarene University.
Yeah, that place.
But as you mentioned, a really great story, and I mean the numbers speak for themselves. He's turned himself into a legitimate prospect, but as you mentioned, old for virtually every level he's been at so far in the minors, but those numbers are really good. I think at least enough to where I would lean towards adding him over Sosa, just because we know what Sosa is, which is fine. Perfectly useful player. I do think I agree with you that he could be useful in your deeper fantasy formats if he does get this playing time for the next few weeks. But just because of that kind of, I guess it's kind of the backup quarterback phenomenon. You just don't know what exactly you're going to get out of Otto Kemp, and it could potentially be interesting. So that in and of itself is enough for me to lean him over Sosa, but wouldn't be terribly optimistic that it's going to result in fantasy goodness, at least not right away.
Yeah, I would say don't look at that 1,010 OPS in the minors and throw a big bid out there. That's not the kind of player he is, but I'm definitely rooting for him, not just as a Phillies fan. But that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you to everybody who hung out in the chat. Great to be back with the regular team here with Ryan, and we'll be back, I believe, all month. I don't think either of us is about to run off to the beach anywhere. We'll be back next weekend here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast.